Okay, let's start. So I'm Claudine Blais. I'm editor-in-chief for a television investigative program in Canada for French public television. And I'm very happy to be here today to introduce you to three journalists that worked on sexual crimes in the past years. First of all, Pascale Müller. She's a journalist in Germany for Buzzfeed. She specialized and mostly covers sexual violence. For example, she made a 3 years investigation about rape in agriculture in Morocco, Spain. So she will tell us a little more about this, her experience. Shiori Ito, she's a journalist from Japan, and she will tell her story, which is special because she shocked her country, Japan, with a public allegation of rape in a country where sex crimes are rarely discussed. And she now sues her raper. And after he sued her for almost €1 million now. So she has a very personal story to tell us. And Cécile Andrzejewski, she's an independent journalist. She's a member of a collective YouPress in France, and she writes for Mediapart too. She participated for 3 years. She wrote a book about the rape as a crime, le viol comme arme de guerre, as a weapon of. And she published a book recently, Silence, that we can translate with Silence Under the White Blouse, and her book was pre-selection for Le Prix Albert Long, which is a very prestigious prize. So let's start with Cecile.
Hi, hello. So I'm here to speak, as my colleagues, about how you can investigate sexual violences as a journalist. So the first thing I believe, and I think that you will understand it, is as a journalist, when you investigate one subject, you make some research before. In the sexual violences, it's the same. It's a field where there is a lot of cliché, where you have many ideas, wrong ideas on it, and you have to work on this. You have to know the topic, you have to know the subject, you have to know the figures. In many, many countries, you will believe that if a woman is raped, maybe she didn't say no, so how the rapist can understand she didn't want, or maybe she searched for it a little, or why she didn't file a complaint, or why she didn't go to the police. You have all this cliché in the sexual violences, which are very common, and many people have them, and it's very important as a journalist to work on it before you work on the topic, before you meet victims, and before you meet also perpetrators. So I took some figures in France, for example, just to give you an idea of what we're speaking about. For example, in France, only 10% of rape victims will file a complaint, will go to the police. So it means that 90% of the women who have been raped don't go to the police. So we break one first cliché. In this 10% of women who will file a complaint, only 10% of the perpetrators will have a condemnation, a juridical condemnation. So it means that it's only 1% of the rapists who will have a condemnation. So you have to understand this, that when you will see a victim, when you will speak to a victim, and when you will speak to people and when you try to fight to sell your article if you are a freelance, you have to fight all the cliché, and for you also you have to know it to understand what are the mechanisms in this field. And also we have to understand that sexual violence has nothing to do with attraction or desire or anything. It's a question of domination. And this is really important to understand. So this, I just wanted to put it like on the table so we know what we are speaking about. So, like the first thing as an investigative journalist, this is what I will advise you to do, to make some research about the figures in your country, and as you will do if you investigate, I don't know, environment or financial field or anything. But this question leads me to one big question that everybody asks you when you work on sexual violences is, there is no evidence. How you can make an article because there is no evidence. It's something which happened between only two people, so how you can prove it's true, how you can believe, how you can trust the people who talk to you. Again, the fact that there is no evidence, it's again a cliche, always linked to sexual violences, because there are evidences, there are ways to prove, there are ways to say, okay, what she's saying is true, or seems to be true. In French, we call it faisceau d'indices, so I tried to search for some translation, and some of my colleagues also, and we didn't really find it, but we can say like compilations of clues, maybe, if it's clear like this. So, for example, you can have a medical certificate. If the victim has been to a hospital after having been raped, you can have medical certificate. If she's sexually harassed at work, maybe she went to a doctor because she started to be depressed. So maybe she's followed also by a psychiatrist. So you can have all these medical papers, medical certificate, who can at least show you that something happened which had an impact on her, which had an impact on her health. And this can be like kind of an evidence. You can also have testimonies from the people around her, from her families, from her colleagues, who can tell you, at that point, at that time, she started to be depressed. She started to change the way of her clothes. She started to finish she stopped wearing makeup, all this kind of stuff. You can see that her behavior changed. So it can also lead you to say, okay, maybe something happened. You have also, if she find a complaint, of course, you have the paper, like if she go to the police, you have the complaint, which is like the big proof, like the big evidence. You can really use it. But as I told you, not so often the women go to file a complaint. But if you can have it, it's the big proof. You have also like if she calls some NGOs to help her, if she saw a lawyer, like you can speak to the lawyer. If it's something which happened at work, maybe she saw the worker union, and you can speak with the people who work in the worker union. So you can try to, I don't know how to explain, but to circle it, like you have compilations of clues who will show you that maybe something happened. And of course, after you have to talk to the perpetrators, to the presumed rapist. And also sometimes when these people speak to you, they really tell you sometimes things and you are like, but you are just telling me what you did and you don't even realize it. So it's really important to also have the other side, because sometimes they really explain you things like, for example, I work on an investigation on a rape happened in an NGO, and when I spoke to the head of the NGO, the guy like really told me, yeah, we heard stuff about this man, but we don't really know, we don't have complaints. So okay, there is 1, 2, 3 women who say things, but I don't have proof. And you are like, but if there is 3 women at different years who tell you the same story, maybe it could show you that there is a problem with this man. And this is also can be used for you if you find some other victims, can be used also for you. So this is like to break a little the cliché. We spoke with Claudine when we start to speak about this debate today, about also how you protect yourself as a journalist, because it's a tough subject. You will speak with victims of tough things, and the stories are hard, and it will impact you. It will have an impact on you. It will affect you, because also it's complicated. It's really complicated for a victim to trust people, to tell her story, because most of the time people didn't believe her, or tell her, oh, but maybe you are making it too big. Or so you really have to build a trust with the victims you want to interview. So many times you have to meet them many times, so they can see that they can speak to you freely, that you will not do like something like publish the story without she knows, or without she's okay for it, and you really all the time have to explain to her what you will do. Like I always tell the victims when I meet them, I will have to call the guy you say is the rapist. I will have to call your company or the people you say they don't protect you. I will have to do it because it's part of my job. Everybody, I mean, I'm not a judge, I'm not a policeman or anything, so I will have to do this. And you explain, and the people understand that it's your job, but you really have to explain them how you work and to build the trust with them. But this trust that you have to build will need time, and the time it will also affect you. For example, I will take a personal story. When I worked on rape as a weapon of war, when I came back, I was in Jordan, and I heard a testimony from a girl who had been raped in a jail by the head of the jail. She was like 11 years old at that time. So the story was really hard to listen. And when I came back, I didn't realize that it had impact on me. But one day I wanted to go and buy a sandwich, and in the bakery the guy said, "Oh, there is no more baguette." Okay, I'm French, and I just like start to cry, like because there was no more bread, and like my friends who were here, my colleagues were working with me at that time, they say, okay, maybe there is a problem now. And I got the chance at that time to be working with colleagues. We had a very, very good connection. And they make me speak, actually. It's not so complicated to deal with it. You really have to speak and to say, okay, this story was very hard to hear. It was very hard for me. And if you need to cry, you can cry. If you need to like be angry, you can be angry. And you tell this to your colleague. You just share it. So you just take it away from you. And just the way of the fact of speaking about this with somebody else will really help you to take a little distance with it. I mean, at least for me it works. So I just gave you the tips. And okay, I still have 5 minutes. And so try to be, when you work on this field, to be with people, with colleagues you can trust, or with editors you can trust, or with maybe some friends of you who work in the psychology field or this kind of stuff, and who can listen to you, and where you can just throw away just what has been hard for you. Because also, if you don't do it, at one point you will like crack down for sure. And also you have to do this because sometimes after hearing a lot of hard stories, you don't realize like, oh, this is very hard, this is awful what she lives, because you're always in this kind of stories. So it's become your daily life, a kind of daily life. And so it's good to speak with other people who will tell you, wow, really, this really happened? And so you realize, oh yeah, this is a big thing. And just to take a distance always. And when you meet a victim, I will say again what my colleague Leila Mignano, which is just there, told yesterday when she was speaking in the panel of exposing war crime. When you meet a victim, you are not a lawyer, you are not a policeman or policewoman, you are not a psychologist, so you always have with you, it's a tip she gave me when I met her, and I will give you for you now, always have on you like a number of an NGO, a number of a lawyer or a psychiatrist or somebody you trust you can give to the victim, because sometimes the people will tell you, oh, I tried to commit suicide, or they will really cry and cry and cry for hours. And like when you make them speak about this, you make them live again like one of the hardest time in their life. So you have to take care also of the consequences it can have on them. So this is why I will advise you to always have contacts of NGO, lawyer, psychiatrist, anything, who can help them to go through it, because it's not your job, but you can like put them in contact, which will maybe they will not want to see anybody, and it's their choice. But if they need, you can help them like this. So I will finish here, but I will answer a question maybe after.
Of course, you'll have time to ask questions, but at first, I give them each 15 minutes, more or less, to present their stories, their work, and after that, we'll go for the questions. So Pascal has a presentation for us.
So, hi, it's very early. I'm very sorry. This is not my time of the day. I work for Buzzfeed News, and I've been covering sexual violence and harassment for around 5 years now. I didn't know that at the time when I prepared this presentation. It's been much longer than I thought. And I've been working for Buzzfeed for 2 years. And the question I get asked the most is like, how do stories even come to me? People usually don't understand how I get stories in the first place because they feel it's such a difficult subject. And when I thought about this, I was thinking about how do other people, how other colleagues get stories, and how do I get them. So I get my stories very differently, especially in the field of sexual violence. I usually don't get tips from people. So I named a lot of things that are happening in the field of sexual violence. You get tips from anonymous sources, you get tips from researchers, unionists, women themselves, works council, women representatives, co-workers. I usually, in the beginning, went out and seeked out institutions or structures where I suspected there was a power imbalance, and I started to talk to women without even knowing there was a problem. I did that with colleagues in agriculture, I did that in media, and I did that in politics as well. And I think that is something that I can really recommend. If there is institutions or structures where there is a very big amount of imbalance of power, I think it's worth looking into and just like having a coffee with the people who work there. That's how I got a lot of my stories. Another thing is that a lot of the women reached out to me directly. Like I didn't go through NGOs or I didn't go through lawyers. I don't have very good contacts actually with people like that. Most of the women called me or wrote me a message. And I started having a public phone number and a public signal number, and a big recommendation from my work experience is to have a public, easily accessible and also secure way for people to contact you. For me, that signal in your countries or your communities, that might be a different way, but for me that works really well. I get a lot of calls and a lot of messages. Yeah, and the second thing that I already said is like reach out to the community you want to cover yourself. And there's a example I brought to you here. I investigated sexual harassment in the care industry in Germany, and I knew from anecdotal evidence that nurses get harassed by patients, by older patients, and sometimes by ill patients as well. And I knew about like 1 or 2 like anecdotal stories. So what I did is I went to all of the Facebook groups where nurses are uniting, like Facebook. There's a very active care worker community in Germany, and I posted surveys there, and I said like, hey, I want to know whether you have been sexually harassed, whether you've experienced inappropriate touching, what your employer did about this. And we got hundreds and hundreds of answers, a lot of concrete stories, and I think that is a great way that you can cover a lot of industries if you don't have, you know, this one story, this one lawyer, this one lawsuit. I think it's a great way to reach out over social media these days. Yeah, that's just to say that I feel often, especially in Me Too, we limit our look so much to either Me Too in media or Me Too in acting or Me Too in the show industry, in music. I think there's so much more that you can do. This is just like what I've been doing in recent years. I looked into agriculture and supply chain where this overlaps a lot with labor rights, with human rights abuses in the supply chain. And I think there's so much more industries where sexual harassment can be investigated. So I would encourage you to broaden your horizon in that way. I'm gonna very briefly present 2 stories that I did, or like 2 bigger investigations that I did. One is rape and harassment in agriculture, and the other concerns media. I'm doing that because the approach for them is very, very different, and they had very specific challenges that I found very hard. So rape and harassment in agriculture has been something I've been doing for 3 years with various freelancers. It is about women who pick fruit and vegetables in various Mediterranean countries, getting sexually harassed by their bosses, blackmailed, threatened, underpaid, have to work overtime. So that's what I'm saying. There is this like connection between labor rights abuse and sexual harassment as soon as the workers are female. I did this work in Italy, Morocco, Spain, and now we've published a new investigation focusing on France, and we could always link that over the supply chain to German supermarkets. I found it very interesting that when I started this, no major media was interested at all to fund this investigation. It was entirely crowdfunded in the end, and now we have brought out a new investigation. I think people still do not care very much, which is okay. People don't have to care about my story. I still find it very interesting that as soon as there's sexual harassment and women being the center of a labor rights abuse, that I feel the interest of major news outlets in Germany is lower than in other labor rights issues. That's the feeling that I get. There was some legal and social impact in these stories, so there was protests and a lot of women went, in Spain especially, to authorities to report. I think in Spain it was like 130 in the end. Many of these investigations were dropped, and actually I think if you fancy doing a story on sexual harassment in agriculture, you could just go again to the same fields. I don't think much has changed. I hear no good news from there, but there has been an initial, I don't know, raise of awareness, I would say. I also worked on harassment in media, and I brought that example here. I investigated allegations of sexual harassment against a reporter of a German daily, Tagesspiegel. It's a newspaper based in Berlin. And when that story came out, we did not name the man, but we gave enough, I would say, circumstantial evidence that everybody working there knew who he was. We did that because legally we couldn't bring that story to the point where we could legally name him under German media law. I found that story very challenging because I often feel that investigating your own community, especially when it comes to sexual harassment, is very hard. I had to interview a lot of my colleagues. I had to interview a lot of my former colleagues. Yeah, sorry, I'm almost done. And I would say that a lot of the times that we investigate Me Too stories, what my previous colleague already said, we also need to make sure that we protect ourselves from the challenges that come with it. And in that story, it was that I was very close to the community I was investigating, and as a woman investigating Me Too stories, I received a lot of flack and a lot of mistrust or A final thing, maybe a little bit of a sad point. When we did that story, we hoped a lot of other people would come forward regarding Me Too in media. We had launched various attempts to reach out to people in media who had been sexually harassed. There were no other stories that we could do because nobody came to speak to us and we didn't find any new leads. So I feel this is a very uphill battle that is still going on. Yeah, thank you.
Shiori.
Good morning. Well, listening you two made me think so many things. Like the Me Too movement had happened 2017 October. It's been almost 2 years, and we are still talking about it because I think it never been enough. And I wonder. I've talked a lot since, and where is the goal? There is no goal because, you know, things would change and we always have these legal challenges and a challenge in media. But I'm happy to say we are in progress, that we are still talking about it, we are still highlighting this issue, because when I was raped, it was in 2015, and I reported to police, and from that time, it has been challenging in a investigation part for me and legal part in Japan, and how I realized, whoa, what kind of society I was living in. But the problem I faced was that it was never really talked about in media. And that is why after 2 years, when I felt the legal system failed me, I went to public and talked about it. But as a journalist, I thought that's not fair. I can't talk about my own story, but that was the only way. And so just briefly about my case, maybe some of you know, but after we investigated, investigator found DNA result and CCTV and the witness from the taxi driver who witnessed that I was first saying that I want to get off from the taxi, please drop me at the station 3 times. But then he took me to a hotel and I couldn't move, so he pulled me out from taxi, and that was taxi driver's witness. So we had quite a lot of evidence for sex crime. Thank you. Sorry, but prosecution office decided to drop it, and that was the problem in Japanese media. They said, if that is the authority's decision, we can't do anything. But I believe that was journalists' work to examine. So if this crime has this much of evidence, and why legal system doesn't work, or where is was it correct decision? Or I'm not trying to pressure my my experience that was, I claim that's my experience, but I think media has to examine, because if we say, okay, that's the decision, and so we can't report, it's a big problem. We never will make progress in our law. So I think as Me Too movement happened through the report, media has a big role to highlight this issue. And I think we are from everywhere, and I have to say Japan is one of the most difficult, society to talk about, especially sexual violence. But recently I went to China this July because my book Black Box was translated in mainland China. But my Japanese publisher told me, Shiori, don't think about it. I don't think you can ever publish this topic in mainland China, because it's not something you can't really talk about. I'm sure you remember in 2015, 5 feminists were arrested, detained for a month in Beijing because they wanted to launch anti-sexual harassment campaign. So it's something that's very sensitive there. But in the end, this July, I published my book and I went there. But the first day I went there, my Chinese publisher told me, Shiori, do not use the word of Me Too. It's censored, so you can be out. And they also say, do not talk about feminism. It's also sensitive. And I realized, oh, what can I talk about? Because this is all about my book. But I realized, even they censored Me Too, or even they can't really talk about it, they find a way, because it doesn't mean that the problems goes away. So I found that I sort of became interpreter, because I'm a Japanese, and I realized once I got to China, the name of my book is Black Box, but subtitle was Japan's Shame. So I guess they put label on it. This is Japan, it's not what happens in China. But that way we made it there, and my readers, they never thought that's Japan's shame. They knew that it's exactly what's happening in China, and that's what's why this issue is so important, because it's so universal. I'm so shocked that only 10% of rape victims ghost report, and in Japan it's 4%. So I guess everywhere, rape is one of the unreported serious crime in the world, and it's because it's often happening behind a door. So there are so many challenges as a journalist how we investigate. But what I found, so, you know, this example in China, I could have talked about it because I'm a Japanese. And in Japan, it was really hard for me to talk about. After I talked about it, I got many backlash and death threat, and I had to move away from my home. And now I live in London. But that made me safe. It put me in a safe place, first of all, because I had to feel safe. So I wrote my book. And also, I could cover and, you know, investigate what's happening in Japan from outside. And it was much easier, to be honest. And I remember once New York Times covered my story, and one of Japanese media, Japanese newspaper, mainstream newspaper, Mainichi, they covered, New York Times covered this story because they couldn't really cover it about it. So they had to import it. So, and I realized that's how sometimes we can do. It's somewhere, some place it's really hard to talk about, but you can talk about from outside. But at the same time, you have to try from inside as well. And recently, I have been covering issues of female genital mutilation in Sierra Leone. And this topic is also very sensitive and not very talked about. And especially as a foreigner, it's really hard to cover in Sierra Leone. But 90% of women and girls have been cut. And first of all, it's very harmful. And there are many death cases as well, which is very underreported. So what we are trying to do now is to communicate with local journalists and discuss how they can cover this story, because it's very hard to cover. And at the same time, we are documenting this process, how they can talk about it. So I am making documentary film, and this would be shown outside of Sierra Leone for international audience. But at the same time, we are working with local journalists, and especially with local broadcast journalists, because radio is one of the main sources for them to reach to the information, and not everyone can, especially women, can't read and write. So radio is most effective tool. So we are working with local broadcasters, and so we do have to do both. We have to reach out from outside, and we do have to do it from inside somehow. And yeah, I'm still trying to find a way what's the best way to do it, but I guess we all have to try many ways. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there's questions that will come, but I have it's really a challenge for journalists to make stories about sexual harassment, and one of the big thing is the law. We all work almost with lawyers, and when you sit with the lawyer of your newspaper or television, they will say, okay, what are the facts, and the fact checking. So if you have tips to give us about what to do some fact checking about something that happens very often behind closed door, one person against one other person, how do you do that?
Get a good lawyer. Like, we are working with a law clinic that helps us publish, not to help us unpublish. And I know that's very difficult to say, and these lawyers are expensive. But I would say, try the maximum of what you want to publish, and like look very closely to the media law that you have in your country. For example, in Germany, I can publish something whether there's hard evidence or not, if I have enough sources confirming that information. And I can write things in a way if I give the other person room to comment. So if I give the perpetrator a lot of space in my article, there's still the possibility to run my article even though I don't have like medical evidence or like other sort of evidence. So I would say like look very closely to how your media law is and get a very good lawyer and like invest money in that lawyer and like ask your outlet to invest money and like have a lawyer check before publication. I work on all of my stories with lawyers from basically day one, and they're very expensive. They're like, I would say the most expensive thing that we have in our newsroom right now is lawyers, and I'm with them on the phone all the time. They're basically like my colleague. And I think it's very, very important. I think it's the only way that you can do these stories is to also feel legally secure as a reporter.
Is there a challenge more bigger when you name the rapist or the person who did the crime? When you have to name the person, it's another challenge.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like there's cases where we didn't name them. I think it really depends on the story. What's your goal? Do you want to show structures? Do you want to show failure of an institution to address these problems? Or do you want to uncover a specific name because the name is so big and relevant, and the crimes are also so big and relevant? In German media, it's kind of like a scale. This is how our lawyer always explains it to me. Like the scale of like how important the person is and how big the crime is needs to be here in order to be able to also name him. And if the person is not so important, this is why we didn't name the man in my newspaper story, because he was not the editor-in-chief. He was just a reporter. So you have to ask yourself also what right, there's this balance between like the right of privacy and the right to free press and uncovering. And I think this is something that you need to discuss with your law clinic on a like case-to-case basis.
Well, it is hard to name. I mean, that is why I guess I had to name by myself. And that is why Me Too movement happened, because we can't cover all in media. So each one of them used social media to talk about their own story. In my case, because of he was very high-profile journalist and he wrote 2 biographies of Prime Minister Abe, it was difficult. You know, my fight was not against him, against our legal system, which we had 110-year-old rape law, you know, and social systems failure, how little support we have. But because of his background, I get so many attacks in a political way, and I still face it. This week there were another right-wing media released about me, and it is scary to deal with. And what scares me the most, I don't have any conclusion, so I'm just saying it, but I feel I'm very isolated in Japan because it's a very sensitive topic and maybe not many people want to take a place. So it's very quiet, even though media are covering such a personal attack article, it's been silenced. And I wonder, what if it was in different places? I feel like we have more solidarity as a journalist to write about. I mean, you don't even have to maybe use your platform, but the media, but you can still do it in any way through social media, because that's how we do it. But that's, I think, what we are missing. And it should never be everything is political, but political war. But it has been for me, so that's quite difficult. Yeah.
These questions make me think about one case in France, was about a French MP called Denis Baupin. It's my editor-in-chief in Mediapart who worked on it with a colleague from the public radio. And they published his name because he was accused by many women from his political party, was from the Green Party, to have sexually harassed them, to have sexually assaulted them. And like for years, and you had many testimonies from many different women. So they decided to publish his name because he was a public figure. He was somebody very public. His name was known, and also he was putting his name in some feminist campaign, which is very shocking when you know what he did to women. And so they decided to publish his name because they had many testimonies, and at the end, he attacked them. He put them on the justice court. He attacked the newspaper. And what happened, that he really got the backlash of it, actually, some months ago, because during the trial, all the victims who spoke to the newspaper, who spoke to the journalists, they came to the justice court, and they came and they testified in front of the justice court. So he attacked the newspaper to say, my dignity, I've been attacked, I've been put down, and at the end, it turns back against him because they all came and they all say, he did this to me, he did this to me. And so at the end, he lost, of course, his case. And it was very like a big tribute, like a big tribute for all the victims who finally could speak out, because when they tried to file a complaint in the police, or at the time they didn't dare to it, or they were too scared of it, and so some stories were too old to be prosecuted. So it was this court allowed them, give them a space to tell their story. So also, I mean, it was not expected from anybody this, but it happened also at that time.
Is there any questions?
Hi. I can hear you. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, maybe for the whole room it's better. Yeah.
Hi. As we know, there are also so many cases where men are the sexual violence is against men, and men are raped and sexually harassed. And I was wondering if you have ever reported these cases, and if you think there is a difference between reporting about men who have been raped and women who have been raped. Thank you.
I will let my colleague speak after. When we start to work with my colleague on rape as a weapon of war in Syria, we work on it. We published something about kids, but we started to dig in for men too, because we know, because we read some NGOs reports, and we also had some testimonies that it happened also to men. There is also, like, for men, it's really like when it happened to jail, it's really something to push their masculinity down, and like you are considered as a woman, so you are less than a man, and this is something because women are most of the victims of sexual violences, if you see at the figures, are women. This is why I say the victim and I say she and her, because most of the time it's women. But of course, as you said, it happened to men, and it's really when it's used by for example here by the Bashar al-Assad regime, but for this example, it's really to put them down more. It's really like a torture instrument to really break them and break their confidence, and it really has consequences after, because you have men who don't want to get married, who don't want to meet more women after, and it has other also consequences.
You know, in Japan, only recently we changed our 110-year-old rape law, and so that happened in 2017. And before 2017, men couldn't be a victim. So now we have new law, and they can. And slowly I've been hearing story from them. Before I didn't hear any, but we start having this very peaceful protest called Flower Demo from this April in Japan. And you know, being on a street wasn't really our culture, but it happened. And I just joined the last month one, and there were two men who came forward and talked in the protest. And so I think we are now making the environment for them, let them talk. But there are definitely not enough report around the male victim cases. So I think that's something we have to highlight. But if I remember correctly, I remember correctly, but there is this photojournalist called Mary F. Kilbert, and she won this year's one of the WordPress photo journalism, and she covered especially male victim in American Army, and that was very powerful. So I think we need to focus more on that as well. Thank you for your question.
So when the Larry Nassar story broke, one of the things that we as journalists got to learn is to do this industrial strength, tight investigation, which stands the scrutiny of law. But unfortunately, a lot of these resource-poor countries, newsrooms do not have either the access to lawyer or that evidentiary checking value. So I was wondering if you have any low resource tips for that, number one. And number two, the Free Meek case, the private investigating firm which worked on the Meek case, which was one of the lead investigators was telling last year in the Media Rumble in India, this year, that they get approached a lot for union busting activities. So they have to look at motive of these tips and these complainants and then decide if it's a legit case or if it has ulterior motive. I think that's a really important point. How do you make that tightrope walk to decide if it's a legit complaint or if it has this ulterior motive of either union busting or targeting, or what is it?
Yeah, I think resources is a big issue, so thank you for raising that. When I started working on these topics, I basically worked on them alone as a freelancer, and certainly at that time I couldn't name so many people or companies for the exact reasons that I didn't have the legal protection. I would still say that if you have a story that you think is worth it to ask, like, even if you're a freelancer and you're very much alone out there, there will always be a news outlet that publishes your story. And when you go into negotiations with them about money, or if you're a small news outlet, I would say, like, okay, let's do just this one story and focus on that one and get money to get that legally secured, and do the others in a way that you can manage them. Even in Buzzfeed is a big name, but in the German team, I'm also working by myself. So, like, I know the problem of poor resources very well. I would say there's a lot of other colleagues working on sexual violence all around the world. Try to reach out to them. In Germany, we are meeting in Berlin also to speak about self-care, to speak about like vetting texts, about how we can improve trauma-sensitive interviews. So I would say try to create this network. About the motivation of the survivor, maybe somebody else wants to say something. I found that part of your question. Do you mean, like, how do we make sure that the motivation of the survivor is really to tell their story, or whether they have some sort of agenda?
Do you think that person is a survivor or not?
Yeah, I think that's not.
The
Yeah.
Sanders campaign and the payment to Bernie Sanders campaigners, union busting, we see that over and over again. In India, the Chief Justice of India was accused of sexual harassment, and we don't know if this is a legit case.
I mean, as journalists, we never know. We just can write to the most extent that we can prove. So, like, I think it's not upon us to. I feel it's not upon us to decide what is the definite truth of something. Like, I'm going out and I'm taking the best evidence that I can collect, and then I present it to the public. And I think it's very hard to find out the ultimate motivation of somebody who's talking to you.
Yeah, and I would add that if you look at the figures, I always go back to figures, but if, like, in the word, I search for it before I speak to be sure about this. Like, it's between 2 and 4% of it's an estimation, of course, but they say only 2 or 4% are false accusations. So it's most of the time, like 98% of the time when people say this, you can say that you can believe them. Also that we have to understand that to tell, to speak out and to tell, I've been a rape victim, I've been sexually harassed, you really have to be brave to say this, because most of the time it's the victim or the alleged victim who will take the backlash on it, who will lose her job, who will lose her friend, who will be accused of lying, or so it's very risky to make a false allegation of rape, actually, for yourself. And most of the time, I mean, so we have to look at the figures, and also, as Pascal said, after you just have to, I mean, as we say, we are not judges, we are not policemen, we just present all the evidences we have to the public, and of course we give the time to the perpetrators or the people accused, like, to speak and to defend themselves also, because it's also our job.
Yeah, quickly, I think we all have to remember false accusation is a crime, and we are putting risks out there. I am accused, I'm now sued with almost €1 million. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm here to fight because this is my truth. And yeah, we only can do that. But other great change I see in Japan is that they start covering failure in the system. There are so many innocent cases happen, especially this March. One case was one father was accused for rape for many years against his daughter, and the judge said he was forcibly sexually intercoursing her, but she didn't show enough resistance, and that's our law. In Japan, there is no idea of consent. To prove the rape, we have to be enough violated, or, you know, have a proof of fight. So that was the point, and we start writing about that, even though this was a failure. So maybe we can collect these failures and talk about that from different side.
Hi, I wanted to ask if what your strategies are for interviewing perpetrators.
I drink. It's no joke. I take somebody with me so that there's a second person to listen. I record. Usually I don't make phone calls. I either get answers in written. If I do make phone calls, I make sure that the person knows and consents to being recorded, that there is a second person present, and I find these interviews very challenging.
The same, I record. I make sure that I have enough information on the case, that I really prepare my questions really hard. Every detail is everything. I write it down, so I know that if you want to sneak out or something, I can say, but at that time she said this, so why you said this day, and now you're saying this to me, are you sure about this? And also when you go to this interview, you have to also know that it's normal, the perpetrator is allowed to defend himself, and it really is allowed to have a voice, and it's complicated, but your job is just to give him a space, also to defend himself. And sometimes when you speak to them, they really say things, and you look at them and like, you don't realize it is what he's saying, because they say such big thing, and like they almost say, yeah, I did it. They will not say this, but in the way they speak, you're just like very surprised sometimes. And so it can be also very helpful for your article after. But always record it.
Okay, can you go to the microphone? Yes, there's one.
Hi there, my name is Keelan Barr. I work at The Guardian. I've been doing a good bit of work on rape prosecutions, and I just wanted to thank all three of you for your work. because this is about institutionalized misogyny. I think we should be clear about that. And our understanding of sexual violence has a long way to go. But I just wanted to ask you about the languaging in your report. Something I encounter which is quite difficult, I find difficult, is around how do you address people in your reporting. And some of the issues that I come across are kind of editorial, but also in kind of conversations with different parties. So should we address these people that we're talking about as survivors, complainants, victims? How do you deal with that? Thanks.
This is a big question I always wonder too, actually. I think also you might ask also the person who speaks to you if she defined herself as a survivor, as a victim, as sometimes activist. Sometimes people became activists. So just you can first ask them how they want to be present. So I start to see more often the word survivor used, and I think I understand why, because victim, I mean, I have no problem with the word victim, because you are victim of something and there is no shame to be victim, but it's a complicated word for people, because also you have a shame linked to it. And I think we have also, as a journalist, like we have the power of just turn it. It's not a shame to be a victim. It's not something bad to be a victim. It's just that something bad happened to you. But you are not the bad one in the story. So I'm wondering myself about this word. I really don't have the answer, actually. So I have to be honest. But I'm happy to see that we are many to wonder the same, how to speak about.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's great if you ask the person how this person is comfortable. You know, the other day I was introducing myself. Hello, I'm a survivor of rape, and then I felt so uncomfortable because I felt like, no, I am surviving every day. So it's not like I survive and I'm a survivor. I'm still surviving. So I still don't know what's the way to call it. So yeah, I think, and you're right. There is no shame to be victim. I mean, that's the truth. But I think, in a way, somehow, for me, what I felt when I hear the word of victim or survivor, I felt I am someone else. You know, I have my own name. I am a journalist, and survivor or victim isn't my tagline, how do you say, title, yeah. So, yeah, somewhat, what I felt personally was like dishumanized when I always have this name before my name.
Thank you very much to the panel. Let me make a first comment, which is about the organization, because I've listened to 10, 20 panels at this conference, and I've never met an all-female panel. And it's powerful, but it's also instructive that it was only when it came to the issue of sexual harassment that we have an all-female panel.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so it tells us about how we ourselves speak truth to ourselves, about where our values are and how we look at the things that matter. And I want to ask you, do you have any male colleagues at all who are interested in sexual harassment? And how do you work with men? That's my first question. But I really want, moderator, I need you to take this back to the organizers to say that I am personally concerned about the composition of this panel vis-a-vis the issue we're talking about. Because it's an issue of power, and we all know where the imbalance lies. I work in Nigeria, and we have learned from the women's movement that the law is an ass. Anyone can write it. You got to look for a way to engage the law. And now we found that we can actually have a sexual offender register. And we're working closely with the media to do that. So any story at all that is published, whether it's investigated or not, will go into the register. And whatever the court decides will change the story. But we need to be able to name and shame. And I find that collaborating with others who have a shared interest with investigative journalism will protect journalists and also ensure that we amplify these issues. So are you working with other voices out there to protect you and to also give more meaning to your work? But thank you for the good work you do.
Thank you. So I want to know if you think that because you're a female journalist, your audience is limited, meaning that you would have a greater readership if you were a male journalist, or let me put it a different way. Do we need male journalists to be investigating and reporting on sexual violence more than we are seeing today? And if so, how can we help this issue to cross the gender lines?
Yeah, this is such a good point. It makes me so angry. Like, I feel even more than what was said that like there's very little men who work on this topic, and gladly I have men in my team who support me and who edit my stories and who actually created the position that I have. So like there is people working there. Still there is like, this is something that is so limited to women, and it's also being perceived inside journalism as a women's issue, which I don't understand. Like for many years I worked on this topic, and the stories I did were not even considered investigative journalism. I wasn't considered an investigative reporter. I was not hired for any position that would be investigative positions, simply because the things I worked on and uncovered were related just to women, and they were about sexual violence. I'm pretty sure that that was one of the main reasons. I think that this, at least in Germany, I feel this is slowly changing. It's slowly changing because we started talking about it and we're starting to be very uncomfortable with it, and we're like pushing, but it's also a very tedious task, and there's another aspect linked to it. I feel that I'm being addressed differently within this topic. I'm being seen often as having an agenda as a journalist investigating sexual violence. I don't know how many times I had to answer the question whether I'm investigating this because I was raped myself, which is a very inappropriate question to ask somebody. And also, I don't think that like you will suspect conflicts of interests when somebody's covering the, I don't know, car industry, and you will ask them like whether they had a car accident. This is not questions we're asking our colleagues. And I think there's a lot of identity, gender, and power imbalance going on in this beat. And I think we must position ourselves as professionals and investigative reporters, even if we're female, and defend this space.
Can I just ask something? Is there maybe an advice for, like, I know it's not often that men ask for advice from women, but maybe you can explain, like, maybe any recommendations for a male investigative journalist to investigate sexual harassment, and what lessons we should draw from this.
I think it's like every field you will like to investigate, you have to prepare yourself, you have to lead your interview as any other investigation. It's really interesting what Pascal said, that the sexual violences were not seen as an investigative field, and it is one. So I mean, if you want to work on the subject, if you have good story, if you have good trust from the people who speak to you, I mean, there is no reason you cannot. I mean, you can investigate this field as any other field. I mean, and I just wanted to add something of what you say, Pascal, because this was really interesting, and also of what you say, Madame, that I really believe that if sexual violences were underreported, is also because it was women working on it. And we have to be honest on this. We have less powerful places in the media, we have less powerful jobs in the media, and this is also why the subject was underreported, because it was seen as woman stuff, not an investigative field, not serious story, and thanks to the Me Too movement, thanks to these people who break it out, because now we are here, we are speaking in this conference and considered as investigative ones, and the subjects start to be on the table, the subjects start to be serious. And also, like from a personal point of view, I'm very proud of being part of completely feminine panel. I mean, we are here, we are women, we are here, we are in this field too, and we have to be, because it's funny when you were speaking before, you say, if I remember well, no, I remember well. Like, we always excuse ourselves as women when we work, and we should not. So it's a little on the side of the subject, but let's trust ourselves too.
Okay, I think it will be maybe the last question, but go ahead.
Okay, hi. My name is Milica Šarić. I work for Center for Investigative Journalism of Serbia, and I'm editor-in-chief there, so I can choose topic, and in future, this should be one of our topics. So I can tell you, from my point of view, it's not whether you're male or female and what is your position in media. We do have a newsroom mostly out of women, because it's like that. They just fight more. So in my country, so it's more of the society. You know, I'm being watching for who you are, where you work. You work in France. You worked in Japan, but you have another story. The reason that you started investigating this was your personal story. So maybe, is it easier for you in France to start this story than us who have societies of more male dominant, being dominant, and patriarchate, yeah, you know, men who are in charge always. I mean, most of the time. So it's much more difficult for women in Serbia, outside capital especially, to connect with somebody, to confess, and not to feel guilty. It's really, really, it's a taboo topic. Every topic that is concerning women is taboo in Serbia. So for me, that is the hardest thing to prove, actually, what is happening. So we haven't done that so far, because we feel like we need to have such a good proof, like bulletproof, because we know that we will be attacked from everywhere. So that wasn't really my question, but I needed to reply on this. My question was, who were your biggest supporters and what were your biggest threats? I just heard about death threats from a colleague from Japan, and I didn't hear about who supported you and who condemned you, and whether you had some kind of threats in France. Thanks.
I will answer the French part, because I'm the French one of this panel. I don't really know the situation in Serbia, so I'm maybe make mistake in what I say, but the subject of sexual violence is a taboo in many societies, and I would say that in France it's mixed, we can say, because of course we look like a free country where it's more easy to speak, maybe, and I guess that it's more easy to speak about the subject than other countries. But still, I think if you remember in the Me Too movement, we had this this article made by Catherine Deneuve and all these women who say, oh, but there is no sexual harassment. We like to be like the men liked women, and the French seduction and all this kind of stuff. When you had this head of the International Monetary Fund, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who was French, who was accused of rape, and you could see in the media, like, everybody was defending him. You heard, like, it was very shocking what you could hear. They say, oh, but this is just a cleaning woman. She just wants the money. Oh, she's so ugly. She should be happy. This guy was interested in her. You really heard this in the radio from big editors-in-chief. So imagine journalists who work with these editors-in-chief and wanted to write a story about sexual harassment. It's really hard. And I think because of the Me Too movement, the editors we are working on have to start to change their point of view. But we can say, and maybe I don't have enough experience to speak about this, but we were speaking about this before. It's interesting. Like, they were not interested in this story. They say it's not a big story, and this is, as you say, a taboo, and women don't want to speak about this. And now they have to realize, because many women journalists, many women put them in front of the fact that women wants to speak and women have things to say. Women as a victim, women as a journalist, women as survivors. So I guess that it's hard. It's hard as I'm freelancer, so it's hard sometimes to sell an investigation on this subject. But as you show that you want to fight for it. So this is the most important. If you want to fight for it, and if the people who you meet trust you, you will be able to do it, because you will find at one point one editor or somebody will say, okay, we can publish this story. But of course it's hard, and of course you will have to fight. But I guess it's a good subject to fight for. I don't know if I really answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, you know, before Me Too movement happened, before I spoke in the public, I never thought I can make my voice out there, but I did it. So in Japan, where it's really hard to talk about this topic, so if I could have done it, I'm sure you can do it as well. And it is hard because one of the survey from Buzzfeed Japan showed that Tokyo-based TV newsroom, there were no women in the boardroom level. So when it comes to decision making, it was all men, and it was therefore it was difficult to bring the topics up. And I heard from many of my female journalist co-workers, they say that they were working on the story of sexual violence, and when it comes to the top desk, they're like, maybe not. So we do need more men in the boardroom, and also more women in the boardroom, and also in the newsroom for sure. Yeah, but I think what I can say is that my enemy in a way has been media, but also media has been my friends as well and my supporter, because what encouraged me to speak, to believe in telling story, was again work of journalism. It was the photojournalist I just named before, Mary F. Kilbert. She did a story in 2016. It was a story about afterlife of the victim. Afterlife? No. Like she followed many years of what happens to the victim and the family. And when I saw the one photo particularly, it was a father who lost his daughter. Her name was Carrie. And he was just standing in her room. And there was no quite, details behind what happened, but it showed a lot what happens to their family. And I think we need to know more of their side, of the family, of the father, of the brother, of everyone around us, because that's when we start understand what this is really about. That when I saw the photo, when I know this woman is no longer in this world, but through Carrie's photojournalism, I got the message, and I believed in storytelling again, like, okay, I can do this as well. So I think in a way storytelling really, really somewhat reaches you, and that has been supporting me. So in Japan, it never had became Me Too movement. We never had. Also who takes the step even though you're a survivor or victim. So I think that's one of the maybe topic that we can cover from as a not to be an observer, or if you have witnessed, if you decided to remain silent, that's the story to share. That's the story we want to hear, maybe because many of us had done it before.
Thank you very much. We have to stop, but I think this panel is very important, and I think it's the first one for this conference about sexual harassment, and I hope we'll have more in the next ones. Thank you very much.